All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is JG Larochette. I'm the founder and director of Mindful Life Project, and it is just such an honor to be here with you all this morning. Hope you had a great start to the day. And I know that, let's just say that mindfulness has always been so important, but right now, very important. And as educators, as folks who've been plugging away in one of the most complex years in education ever, I just want to first just say thank you. I want to share gratitude for all you've done, both seen and unseen. My wife is a transitional kindergarten teacher, and I was a third, fourth, fifth grade teacher, and my kids are third grader and sixth grader. So it's very, very, very important that you all know how grateful people are for all you're doing beyond the call, that's for sure. So today's session, we're going to go into a little bit of our history at Mindful Life Project, our approach in mindfulness and education, and do a little practice. Of course, we can't do a mindfulness session without some practice. And then we'll do some Q&A and any questions around our methodology, the way we approach things, specifically in making mindfulness as culturally relevant, as engaging, as powerful, and owned by kids as possible. So nice, hey, Sally. Just to kind of share, our mission is to empower underserved children through mindfulness and other transformative skills to gain self-awareness, confidence, self-regulation, resilience, and lifelong success. Now, the key for us is that we know that young people, all of us, were born with mindfulness, right? So when we teach mindfulness and you hear empower, really it is about our young folks already had this, we all had this, and now we're just tapping them back into the present moment, right? When we're born, we're curious. We're always checking into what's happening around us. We're very curious about our senses, right? When we're little kids, little toddlers, we're very present. And then either we abandon the present moment because of stress and trauma and all the different hits of the world life that can happen to us, or we can get a little closer to it, okay? So we've been doing this work for 9 years now. A little bit of our story. So you'll see these three wonderful young folks right here. That's Alexis, Chanel, and Deanna. I was a third grade teacher at a school in South Richmond, California. Anybody know Richmond, California? I know it's a little bit further away from y'all. I see some nodding like, yeah, no, not really. Okay, cool. So Richmond is in the San Francisco Bay Area. We are right next to Berkeley, California. Yeah, if you saw the movie Coach Carter, for sure. That's kind of how we became famous in a way. Basically, we are a community of about 100,000 people, but surrounded by many cities in the Bay Area. A very, very powerfully resilient community, but very, very systemically oppressed and very under-resourced. So I grew up in Berkeley, California, just 7 miles away. And when I came to Richmond in 2003, I couldn't believe the lack of resources for young people, the deep violence and tragedies were happening all the time. And what I also realized was, like, in World War II, we had the boom town. So about 60,000 people came from the South, mostly African-American community members, to come work Rosie the Riveter warships. And so our community was booming in the 1940s, jazz clubs, everything, movie theaters. It was amazing. And then after the war, all the resources were sucked out. So we've been in about 70 years of losing resources and jobs. And so it's been a really, really powerful, resilient community, but hit by so many different ways. And so I had been a teacher for 8 years prior to that. And anybody in this group, if you've heard of the organization PlayWorks, anybody in the group, go ahead and put on chat if you heard of PlayWorks. So my first job was working as a site coordinator, making sure the playground was a safe, fun, engaging, loving, compassionate place in 2002 in East Oakland, and then 2003 in South Richmond. And so what my students kept on saying is, I don't want to go back to class. And I started seeing the toxicity in classrooms, and I started seeing how so many adults were yelling and screaming, and there were chairs being thrown at teachers, and it was just like such a chaotic feel in the classroom. So I said, I'm going to be a teacher because that sounds amazing, right? Seeing what was happening in the classroom, I was like, I want to teach. But I really wanted to try to figure out how to create a classroom that was built on trust, built on safety, built on compassion, and built on unconditional care. Because whenever I worked with kids in those early years, they knew that their behaviors were not being judged by me, Behaviors were a symptom of what happened to them. And so I would always help coach them and support them. And in that journey of teaching, how many of you know of burnout? How many know of how vicarious trauma can really affect us, right? How consistently showing up for 25, 30, if not 150 kids a day can be the most powerful thing in the world, but also can lead to deep, deep exhaustion. And I'm speaking to the choir here, right? Most of you are like, oh, it is what month? What year? Where are we right now? What am I doing? Who am I, right? Like, it's just the giving, giving, giving. And specifically in our most underserved communities, we have very little self-care in education and history specifically. And so in 2011, these 3 third graders, another 22 of them, had to deal with me having deep anxiety and deep depression. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't able to function. I wasn't able to think properly. I wasn't rational. I was just so disconnected. And ironically, the year before, I'd gotten Teacher of the Year. Right? So that kind of gives an example of like how quickly like I had been working my tail off, feeling so passionate, but then just boom, right? The complete just exhaustion and vicarious trauma. We had lost quite a few students to violence, unfortunately, in those 8 years. And every time that happened, I always thought we got to do more. We got to change things. And unfortunately, a lot of the teachers and especially my leadership were like, well, that's just going to happen, JG. And so I think all of those years of just feeling like the systems built for our students, especially our students of color, feeling that the resources weren't there for social, emotional, mental health, I think it all just compounded over years. It wasn't one specific thing. But I hit that big, big downfall. And my third graders had to be a result of it. So this year, from August to December, what do you think? When I was stressed out, when I was depressed, when I wasn't sleeping, what do you think was happening with my third graders? Their mirror neurons were on fire. Their behaviors were out of control. They were so disrespectful to each other. And it was because I wasn't well. And I didn't know what to do. I tried everything. I tried alternative medicine. I did Western. I did therapy, counseling. I did, going to psychiatry, got medication. But there was just this complete just sucking out of my mind, body, and spirit. Yeah, the mirror neurons are strong, right? We will reflect often what we're around. And so our young people will reflect the energy of the adult. I learned that the hard way. And the main thing that happened was that I found mindfulness at the very last result, right? It was like, okay, I'll try meditation. I was an athlete prior to that. And so sitting still with myself was not exactly what I was connected to when growing up. But that moment of doing mindfulness the first time in 2011 in December was life-changing. I brought it back to my third graders, and amazingly, well, you all know this, 25 kids with severe trauma, most of them had like significant primary trauma. They actually did the practice longer than I asked them to. So the first time I did a mindful sit with them, January 2012, I said, we're going to focus on something I just started learning 2 weeks ago. And they're like, what's that? Hopefully you seem better. What's going on? Like, what are we going to learn? I was like, we're going to do this thing called mindfulness. And they looked at me, right? They're like, this guy. Yeah, probably not. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, but listen, it's changed my life. I've been suffering. I was very honest with them. I didn't tell them everything, but I was like, I'm not coming every day really present. That I'm not doing well physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I'm trying to show up. And I was very truthful with them. That first time we did the practice, I was going to do 2 minutes mindful breathing, mindful listening. Every kid closed their eyes. First of all, that was a celebration. I was like, wait, what? What just happened? Especially with young folks with trauma. I was like, wait, every kid closed their eyes? And then not one sound could be heard for the first minute. My voice was the only sound that there was in the room. By the second minute, like I thought they were messing with me. I literally thought that this was like they had some prank on me, and I thought like all of a sudden there'd be like some show come in. I was like, there still was no eyes opened. Every kid was focused on my voice. You could just see it. I'm not a huge like seeing energy, but the actual room felt completely different. By third, fourth, fifth minute, they were still in it. I tried stopping at 2 minutes. I was like, when you're ready, open your eyes. Not one kid opened their eyes. By the 7th minute, that's when kids open their eyes and every kid shared out. That was the most peaceful I've felt. That was the most calm I've ever felt. That was the quietest moment of my life. I felt like I was floating on clouds. So for the next 6 months, we created Mindful Life Project. Just stopping right there. If you can put on chat, how does that story connect to your experience? Give me a sentence of any of that connecting to your experience, either my personal story or the story of the students. If you've been doing mindfulness with kids, just curious, just share out a sentence so we can connect as a community. Teaching students mindfulness, yep, on my own practice, yes. It had to be authentic for sure. Thanks, Mia. Yeah, exactly, right? The hunger for that silence and presence. And like I said, I realize now adults are a lot harder to teach mindfulness too. Right? We've abandoned ourselves enough. We abandoned the present moment enough. Kids will connect so much more. Oh, I love it. Cindy, thank you for sharing that. First time, cool. Awesome. Yes, the burnout. Yes, yes, yes. So from our perspective, mindfulness is a personal practice, but it's also relational, right? And so what we want our young people to know, right, is that mindfulness is about deepening connection to the present moment with ourselves, but then it's also about how we're in our community. And so our approach is really weaving in different programs. We have 2 main programs you'll see here on the video, and I'll go more in depth on that. But the main thing is that teachers oftentimes are being told, here's a day-long training for character, development. Here's a day-long training for social emotional learning. Here's a day-long training for mindfulness. And oftentimes we see teachers being put as the counselors, as a therapist, as the this, as the that. So we want to make sure when we provide our services, we have coaches that are on school grounds teaching mindfulness from a real authentic place, from as TK through 8th grade pipeline, but providing the programs for teachers and families and students to get the practice, grow the practice, then own the practice. So we're a direct service organization providing the actual programming to students, and I'll go more into that as we go along, but here is a short introduction. I got my feet on the floor. Got my spine in the line. Got my hands in my lap. Got my heart to the sky. Now close your eyes. Mindful Life Project is a nonprofit that provides innovative mindfulness-based programming. We have a comprehensive approach of supporting the mental and emotional well-being of students, teachers and school staff and families through mindfulness-based programming.
There is significance in the crimes that happen in our neighborhoods, deaths that take place, and lots of tragedy happens. So our students are traumatized by the environment they live in.
And all eyes should be on Malik. Jordan. I hear something from really a deep place in his heart. So we want to use our mindful heartfulness and be with him right now.
I'm grateful for my brother because he died and now he doesn't have to worry about anything.
So, we love you very much, Malik.
It's an anger that, even as a mother, you want to fix everything, but you can't touch. It's somewhere deep inside his heart, and I haven't been able to touch it, but mindfulness has.
This is my first year with mindfulness, and we practice mindful sits, and we practice thinking about what makes us upset and how we can fix that. And I've seen a huge growth in a number of my students and how they've been able to think of other things to do rather than hit or rather than yell.
What I've learned in mindful life is to calm my breathing because I got asthma a lot, so it helps me to stay mindful, and sometimes it helps me not to hurt somebody.
No judgment, I'm here in the now. I'm in the present, no judgment, I'm here in the now. I'm in the present, no judgment, I'm here in the now.
Rise Up is our small group intervention prevention program where we're empowering young people through mindfulness, woven with yoga, expressive arts, and performing arts. In this programming, students receive 1 or 2 deep dive sessions each week, about 45 minutes each, where kids are able to use mindfulness, deepen their practice, and use those other healing modalities to let out stress and overwhelm. However, in order to create a whole school culture and climate where mindfulness-based social emotional learning is supporting all students and teachers, we also have Mindful Community. In Mindful Community, our amazing mindfulness instructors push into classrooms once a week for about 20 minutes. There they teach mindfulness-based social emotional learning curriculum where they weave in mindfulness practices and how to use mindfulness when we're in regular daily lives, right? When we're in the classroom, when we're on the playground, when we're in the moment. We're able to really provide whole school approaches so every kid on a school campus receives mindfulness and every teacher doesn't have to teach it themselves, but they can absorb it and learn it with us. We've been able to see that mindfulness embedded in everyone's experience from students, teachers, and families provides the mental and emotional well-being to counter the deep trauma and stress that so many of our communities are facing. In our program, we also have added trainings for teachers, school staff, school psychologists, counselors, and anyone else that comes into contact with young people. Our trainings are able to create that practice that's personal well-being, to be a mindful educator, and then gives them the training to be able to teach our curriculum that's been pioneering mindfulness education for 9 years now. I got my feet on the floor. So that gives you a little snapshot of what we're doing. I want to drop into a little bit of the why behind creating mindfulness for our kids with most need that weaves yoga, expressive arts, performing arts. What was told to me by the students was, look, mindfulness needs to be in everybody's life, but also we have to have healthy ways to let out our trauma and let out our stress, let out our overwhelm, right? So in our small group program, what we're doing is taking kids out of their regular classroom and empowering them with about 15 minutes of mindfulness. And then from that mindfulness, our lessons with expressive arts, yoga, and performing arts are really focusing in on using the mindful skills with those other modalities. What we've seen is that young folks that have the opportunity to have this more deeply intentional programming are able to really interrupt those cycles. What we know about stress and trauma, as we know in mindfulness, the prefrontal cortex starts to shrink and atrophy and disengage when we have stress and trauma. Our amygdala, our limbic system, our reptile brain becomes hijacking the rest of the brain, cortisol, adrenaline galore. And our young people, it's not about being capable. They're highly capable. It's about being available. And so we've seen suspension rates drop significantly. We've seen students own their practices. And most importantly, we've seen students who decide that they want this work to be theirs. So we have 5 current staff members at Mindful Life Project who are former students of ours, right? So really trying to make sure that our young folks see this as a way of owning it, but also, as you saw, mindful hip hop, that was from the students. I love hip hop, but I'm not a hip hop artist, right? But that was what the students were like, hey, why don't we bring in hip hop in a way that really brings in those mindfulness lessons? And so a lot of times our small groups, we focus on that. As you saw in the video, with expressive arts, we know that kids can let out some of that stress and trauma. With the yoga and movement work that we do is around releasing and also weaving in the mind-body connection and really creating these communities of practice together. And finally, you heard the mindful hip hop performing arts, really where young folks earn that session on Fridays or Thursdays at their school and they're doing spoken word. They're creating new songs. They're creating different skits and performances for their school to show what does mindfulness look like off the chair, right? So we talk about mindfulness, a lot of times we're thinking about the mindful sit portion or being in practice. But what we want our young people to really realize is that the 7 mindful skills that I'll show shortly are the ones that can get us right back in the here and now, no matter what's happening around us, right? So really making sure that that piece of the practice that's relevant to the daily experience is super important. And of course, young people love hip hop, so they're really being able to engage in that deep way, okay? And then we saw, that was our first program. We saw young folks in small groups really thriving in it, but we take them back to class, and far too often after that session with us, far too often they would get escalated by something in the classroom, right? They would be regulated, they'd be attentive, they'd be in community with us, and they'd go back to class and something would trigger them into their stress response. So we were trying to figure out in 2012, late into the nights that year, what do we do to change that experience? First of all, so that all kids get mindfulness, not just the most in need students, but how do we make sure that every kid gets it? But most importantly, how do we make sure teachers also get it without having to be trained in it and own it within a couple weeks, right? So it doesn't feel stressful to them, right? We know that teachers are being trained in things constantly, and every year it feels like there's more things that we're supposed to be holding. So we decided mindful community was the way. So we push into every classroom at the school, TK through 8th grade. We've had some high schools in the past, and we teach the mindfulness lessons with the teacher in the room. As you'll see here, right? The teacher's at her desk, but she's dropped in, right? And so that started creating this really holistic community of buy-in where teachers and students and families really started wanting to dive even deeper into the practice. As you know, or as you heard earlier, we have our TK through 8th grade work. So we have 3 curriculums. What you're seeing here is our Brain House curriculum. This is our work for TK through 2nd graders. What do you see, right? You see some downstairs friends, the amygdala, and those are our strong emotions, right? So kids really start to understand emotions, understand how to welcome them, how the house represents the brain, right? The downstairs brain is our survival mechanism. The upstairs brain is our prefrontal cortex, and our 7 mindful skills with some other friends that join, right? So from mindful breathing with Breathing Bruno, from last mindful listening with Listening Leslie, body scanning Sammy, and we have Heartful Jaime. So the young folks are starting to own the stillness practice, but also starting to really increase their awareness of how we should welcome all emotions and thoughts, how we shouldn't judge any of them, and how skills on top can help friends on the bottom be at home, right? So being at home in themselves. Then we moved up to our 3rd through 5th and 6th grade curriculum, as well as our middle school curriculum. And it becomes really focused on deeper stillness practices, right? Deeper stillness practices with the 7 skills, and then more of the relational aspect. How do I use mindfulness when I'm challenged by somebody? How do I use mindfulness when I'm overwhelmed with a test? How do I use mindfulness if I'm frustrated with my siblings? So we start really building that up. And by our middle school time, the 7 skills, the focus then is then how do we get into 6 to 8 minutes of stillness practice? And how do we start using mindfulness in a way of social justice, community transformation, activism? How do we really start making sure that mindfulness is a tool to really transform our systems into places where everyone feels a sense of belonging? So I'll pause right there. When you see these 2 last posters, are there any questions or thoughts that come up? Please use chat because we're a pretty big group right now, but any questions or thoughts just from the approach or curriculum? Yeah, awesome. So we don't really necessarily sell our stuff because we believe that all of this work is transformational. So we work with schools across the country in creating really strong ecosystems where they can use our curriculum. Uh, so for us, it's kind of like a thing of like, well, we don't want to sell stuff because we want to make sure it's a relational thing. But the main thing for us is we want to share things as best practices. So all of you who are here, you've joined the session, you'll get the posters as well, okay? So we want to make sure that you all get it. Now, yeah, great. So let's just talk a little bit before we do some practice, right? So let's talk about mindfulness defined. So mindfulness is paying attention on purpose without judgment. Now, what we know about the practice is the brain is wired for survival. The brain has a negativity bias because it's processing information that is either safe or unsafe. And the back of the brain, that downstairs brain, right? That downstairs brain doesn't rationalize true danger from perceived danger. So if anxiety or fear or sadness or loneliness or nervousness, any of those emotions can trigger the same response that a bear coming at us could trigger. So what we're doing in mindfulness, and we know about the research now, is the more stress, the more overwhelmed there is, the more hijacked the brain is, the more in the back it is, and the prefrontal cortex starts to atrophy, shrink, and become less dense. That's what happened to me in 2011. I wish I had an MRI then. My prefrontal cortex would have been so much smaller, less engaged, and less powerful, and my back of the brain would have been on fire. So if you look at MRIs of folks with chronic stress and trauma, the back of the brain is super active, engaged, and taking over, and the prefrontal cortex is shut down. Okay? So that's what happens. Why can't we self-regulate? Why can't we pay attention? Why can't we problem solve as well? What's decision making? Why is decision making so challenging? It's literally the wiring of the brain, right? It's literally this part of the brain is not actively engaging, and it's not dense enough, and it's not grown in density. So we have plasticity. Every time we do a mindful sit, we're actually changing the architecture of our brain. We're in what we know now, 6 to 8 minutes of practice a day will create that deeper wiring in the prefrontal cortex, more dense, more engaged, more active, and actually the gray matter increases in size. And the more we practice mindfulness, the less that back of the brain becomes the default mode and stress response is lessened. Okay, so this is for most of you probably repeat, you probably heard this, but what we want young people and people to know is that it's not you, right? So when I was dealing with anxiety and depression, or they say I have anger problems, or I'm always sad, like that's just an emotion. And it's literally the wiring of your brain that's being changed because that emotion is triggering that amygdala, right? Versus when we do mindfulness, it's like, oh, welcome that emotion, welcome that thought, welcome that physical experience, right? So then that's how we start getting that buy-in, right? Adults oftentimes like, well, I don't really, sitting still doesn't make sense. Why would sitting still do that? We have 30 years now of neuroscience to prove that self-compassion, mindfulness, and gratitude can literally change the wiring of the brain. So let's go ahead and do a practice together. We're going to do about a 5-minute mindful listening, mindful breathing, and body awareness practice. So before, it's been a morning already, so just shake it out a little bit, find some movement. Notice the body, right? Shoulders, right? For some of you, it's later in the day. For some of us, it's early on West Coast time. Just notice how the body feels right now. And then we'll do it the way we do with our students. So go ahead. I know you're on mute, but just in your room, wherever you're at, repeat after me. I've got my feet on the floor. I've got my spine in a line. I've got my hands in my lap and my heart to the sky. And then the offering is to gently let the eyes close. And then we're going to practice some mindful listening, mindful breathing, and body awareness, but just notice that you're here now. So in this practice of mindfulness, this mental, emotional, mind, body, heart alignment practice, we know the mind will drift. We use no judgment. So start with the sound of the bell and stay with it as long as you can. So other sounds will come up, but just gently come back to the sound of the bell. So just gently acknowledging that it takes courage and strength and power. And it's radically different, right, than the way most of us have been trained to sit in stillness and be with ourselves. So gently just begin by honoring yourself. And now let's bring attention to our contact points. Your feet flat on the floor, your contact with the seat, cushion, or bed, couch, wherever you're seated, the weight of your body. And then noticing your hands, they're loose or tight. Mindfulness is training to pay attention on purpose without judgment. We welcome it all. Thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, without needing it to be different. We just welcome it as it is. Now let's bring awareness to sounds all around us. Using sounds as a way to train that prefrontal cortex to be right here, right now. We let sounds come, just hearing them as sounds, not judging them, not deciding if they're good or bad, right or wrong. Thoughts inevitably will pop up. We know that the untrained mind will go more into the future and the past. There's no judgment. There's no need to change it. The noticing of the thoughts is mindfulness again. It's like a push-up. When we push up, we're strengthening and tightening muscles. The weight is being held. And then we let down, we go towards the bottom, and we loosen some of those muscles. That's kind of like remembering to be mindful again is when we go back up. And then when we forget to pay attention, no judgment, we're just going back down. In order for muscles to get stronger, got to exercise them. In order for the mind, body, and heart to get stronger, we've got to exercise them. That's what we're doing here. Hear 3 new sounds in the next 10 seconds. And now letting sounds go in the background. They'll still be there, but now we're going to bring in the breath. So just noticing it's easy to pay attention, if it's hard, if you're any criticism happening of yourself or others or whatever's around you. Mindfulness is kind of like a flashlight. The flashlight's on, it's shining light on what's there. The person holding the flashlight, they might have opinions if that's the right thing to be looking at, the wrong thing. So let's become the flashlight of awareness. So without having to judge or change, just noticing what's there. So as we bring in the breath, there's no need to change it or do anything. Just notice the inhale, the pause, and the exhale. Just tracking breath like it's the most interesting thing there is. If it's easy to focus on breath, fine. If it's hard, no problem. That's normal. If the mind wanders 100 times, no problem, because guess what? The moment you notice that it was wandering, was mindful again. Maybe you feel the breath is strongest in your belly, the rise and fall, maybe with the chest, expansion, contraction, or simply at the nostrils, the cooler air going in, the warmer air going out. And keep your attention there for about 20 or 30 seconds. Wherever the breath is the strongest, may that be your anchor spot. Just like a boat needs an anchor to be in one place, the anchor can help us be right here, right now with the breath. So belly, chest, nose. And now gently moving just for the last several moments to check into the body, emotions, stress, thoughts of the future and the past. They'll start being in our actual physical experience, right? So here we are just noticing, maybe with some gratitude that our body is here. And just checking in, legs, any tightness, looseness, any contraction. Lower back, mid back. We know that suffering is the resistance, avoidance, or pushing away of the lived experience. So if we push away our thoughts, we push away our emotions, we try to not have physical experiences as they are, that's suffering. And the opposite is radical acceptance. What if I welcome this actual human experience as it is internally? So wherever you're finding some tension, some tightness, maybe checking the belly, the chest, the shoulders, just bring kindness and warmth to it. Move awareness to the neck, the jaw, the face. We often hold a lot of mental exhaustion around the eyes, the temples, the forehead. And we'll close practice with the mindful listening practice. But this time I'm gonna play a little game, so eyes still gently closed. I'm gonna hit the bell, don't count that, but I'm gonna change the sound after I hit it and see how many times I change the sound. And then gently, whenever you're ready, it's your practice. If your eyes aren't open yet, flaring the eyes open, wiggling and stretching if you need to. And then go ahead and put on chat how many times you heard the sound change. Little mindful listening challenge. Let's see, 8, 7, 3, 6, 7. I love it. We do this with the kids almost in every practice because they love it. It was 6. But it can get easier and easier when you practice. So this is a vibratone. If you guys don't use vibratones, I really recommend it. Basically, for us, we want to make sure this is a secular practice in schools, right? And a lot of folks use the singing bowl, which is fine. We just want to separate ourselves from that. This is a Latin percussion instrument. It has that little hole right there that makes it real fun. So, exactly. I love it. Remember it. Sometimes people are like, well, it made it two different sounds. Woo, woo, right? It's all good. No judgment. So part of our approach is making sure that everyone is provided wellness, right? Vibratone, I'll put it on chat. It's called a vibratone. It's a Latin percussion instrument, vibratone. Our young folks love it. A lot of times we'll have our students lead practice, right? So we'll have student leaders come up to the class. They'll do the call and response. I got my feet on the floor, my spine in a line, my hands in my lap, my heart to the sky. And then they'll hit the vibratone and they'll lead some practice. So part of our approach is making sure that the whole school ecosystem is supported, right? So we have weekly sessions for teachers from 3 to 3:30 or 3:30 to 4 on school days. And we do weekly sessions in English and Spanish for our families as well. So we're really trying to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to receive this practice, right? To create a true mindful community where buy-in is from the top all the way to the ground. We know our kids are going to own it. We also offer those trainings you heard about, making sure people have a personal mindfulness practice proficiency. We offer mindful leadership trainings, curriculum trainings. And as we kind of go into the last like 10, 12, 14 minutes, what I'd love to talk about is also kind of the why behind the approach, and then just do Q&A. So when I was working with my kids, what I realized was that mostly in education, right? Historically, especially since No Child Left Behind, there's been, in our communities of color, specifically our low-income communities of color, there's been this strong push to do academic rigor, right? And what I saw in my young people was they'd be in my class and they knew that test scores didn't represent what I believed of them. But then they would go to 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and they started feeling like they didn't belong, right? They felt like, oh, if I don't test well, it means I'm not a good student. If I'm not a good student, then I shouldn't be in school, right? And we started really seeing our young people abandoning themselves because they were being told that they weren't good enough. Specifically, our kids with the most trauma, right? So we talk about intergenerational trauma, we talk about intergenerational stress, and we've been really seeing kind of that perpetuation of the school to prison pipeline. And I kept on seeing kids who were really, really struggling emotionally being sent home all the time, which made no sense to me, right? Like, I get behaviors are a problem, but if we're going to send them home, what do we do as students? Make them feel even less of a sense of belonging. So really, how do we make sure that those kids actually the ones that feel closer to the school, closer to the people? So in Rise Up, in that small group program, we actually don't only work with at-risk kids. All of us are at risk in the way I see it. But we actually combine kids who have severe behavioral issues because of trauma and stress, about 5 kids per group, and 3 kids who were thriving socially and academically. And the reason I did that was because I saw kids who often would be in misbehavior kind of cycles would hang out together. And then kids who were doing really well socially and academically, they would hang out together. And what do we know about kids? They listen to each other way more than they listen to adults, right? So how do we start really creating this ownership where kids saw that they weren't being labeled? So in our Rise Up program, that's the focus. It's making sure that we create the ability for young people to know that they're not being judged because of their behaviors, that everyone has deep need. So I think that for me is a key part of why mindfulness in education is so important, right? When we think about our 7 skills, what the 7 skills have done for me have made me understand that I belong to myself. I brought a sense of belonging to me that for 31 years, I didn't totally feel. And it wasn't my parents' fault. Parents did a great job. But what do we get? We get a lot of messages, layers of conditioning by media, by schools, by friends, by music, by all the different things of like, this is how you should be. And if you're not this way, you don't really belong. So that is my last piece for this. And I would love to do Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so, is I am first language Spanish speaker. My parents are Argentinian and Israeli. And I had a huge identity crisis at age 6. Right? Because I don't look it. So I didn't really know where I belonged, right? I was growing up in Berkeley, California, like, oh, Berkeley, super diverse, all hippy dippy, all love and peace, super segregated, right? What I noticed was that I would not get sent to the office for the same thing my Black friend would get sent to the office to. At 6, 7, 8 years old, I wouldn't get sent to the office when the Latino kid did something, he got sent to the office. So in this white skin that I have and being male, I really want to make sure that I use that privilege to really dismantle that so that my son, when he's 18, right, doesn't have the same benefits that this white male skin body has been given to me. And so I think when we look at mindfulness education, I always say mindfulness isn't mindfulness without social justice. So yes, it's a self-care tool. Yes, it can really empower ourselves and change our wiring of the brain, but that's only as effective as how we are in the world. So Dr. Dan Siegel says this: there's no such thing as me without the we. And there's no such thing as we without the me. And truly what happens is the we, right? We're all interconnected. But if we don't start looking at mindfulness as a tool to interrupt or dismantle systemic racism and oppression, we're not doing it right. And so I really just want to kind of end on that note of like our approach. Our team is about 83% people of color. Our board is also representative of that as well. Our community is 93% kids of color. So we really want to make sure that mindfulness doesn't go down that path that yoga did, right? Where all of a sudden you got to pay $30 to take a yoga class and it's for like middle and high income folks. And it's got like certain, we just want to make sure that mindfulness is proven to be the practice of our communities because it's from them. It's practice that comes from people of color. So that's really a big part of our organization. We have the hip hop, but we don't want to use hip hop as a way to kind of continue some of the stuff that happens in the rap industry where the white CEO is calling shots to tell people what they should be rapping that sells albums. We want to make sure our young folks in our communities are really engaged at a point of ownership and empowerment. So I love to do Q&A. I bet there's some questions. We have about 10 minutes left. So yeah, please go ahead, either unmute yourself and share. I know that we're a big group, but still unmute yourself and share, or on chat. I guarantee if you're thinking it's someone else's too, don't worry. Hey, Barnaby.
I have a question.
Please.
I don't know if you can see me, but we've had a lot of trouble introducing mindfulness into our community because, people from the Christian persuasion think that if you still your mind, the devil comes in. So, yeah. And I actually think it's a beautiful opportunity to merge with the Christian side because it's kind of also a time for contemplative prayer. I mean, I'm Christian. So I just wondered how you handle that and the language.
I love it. So thanks for the question. That's the that is the most important question, I think, because in mindfulness, right, we've been using in the healthcare system since 1979. the way I approach that is we work with quite a bit of families that are Jehovah's Witness, also Christian, right? A lot of our families are Catholic as well. And when that question comes up to me, this is what I say. First, the way we're teaching it is definitely secular. And the way I can say that is anything we're going to bring attention to, right, in our practice or discuss is the human experience, right? If you think of like a wheel, right, a bicycle wheel, the first core of the wheel can represent kind of our five senses, right? The second core of the wheel can represent our body, the sensations internal of the body, right? The third core of the wheel can represent thoughts and emotions. And the fourth core of the wheel can represent our intrapersonal relationship. How are we treating ourselves? And then interpersonal relationship. How are we treating others, right? Or how are they treating us? I use that wheel, that's a Dan Siegel wheel of awareness practice, because anytime that I'm guiding you or one of our teammates is guiding you into a mindful sit, anything we're training you into is paying attention to your humanity, right? To your human experience. Anything that happens beyond that, if it feels spiritual, if it feels religious, that's on the individual. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, right? Because we're truly just training ourselves to be deeply compassionate with our human experience exactly as it arises, right? So for us, that's been the biggest thing. I had kids, I'll just use one little anecdote, but I had a kid, father was Jehovah's Witness, family was Jehovah's Witness, and they're like, man, no, we can't do mind, body, and spirit. And I said, totally respect it, like no force, like we're not forcing anybody to do this. But can I talk to you about the practice a little bit, talk about the healthcare system, mindfulness-based stress reduction from 1979? Can I talk to you about what we're doing? And he was like, you know what, after talking to you, I want my son to stay in the groups, but I'm asking him to not participate. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like if that feels comfortable to him, if he wants that. So we asked, he was a sixth grade at the time. And he was like, you could just start seeing him every session. Like first session, he was like, and then you start seeing his eyes start closing. And then you started seeing him like really drop in. So I had to tell his dad, I was like, hey, yo, check it out. Like he's actually practicing right now. I want to make sure you're aware of that. And then he came to one of the sessions and practiced too. And he's like, man, I need to do this. I need to do this with my son. Like we got to do this all the time. Like this is amazing. So truly, I think when we bring that approach of like whatever we're training is attention to our human experience with compassion and care, the rest of it is just personal. So that's one thing. We work, and the question from Mia, right? So we work with about 50 schools. Most of our work is across the state of California, but we do have 2 partner schools in Atlanta. We have 2 partner schools in Kansas City. We have schools in Las Vegas we're working with. So our organization has really started to grow. And the reason we've grown the organization is this. Most of mindfulness and education is happening from like that train the teacher, make the teacher have to teach it. And I think that's important. As you see, we do that. But I also think it's really important, especially in our low income, underserved, systemically oppressed communities, because burnout is real. Teachers are gone within 2 or 3 years a lot of times, that we have a direct service element. So that's our hope, is a direct service work will grow, kind of like PlayWorks. Those of you who know PlayWorks, we're 25 schools in 2002 here in the Bay that I worked in. I was one of the 25 schools. And now it's 3,000 or 4,000 schools across the country, right? Because why? Because play is easy, but having a person that's responsible for play and organization is not as easy in our school capacities, right? So the same thing there. And I want to give one more kind of story and then questions. I'm still looking at chat and I'll answer. So the question is, what is so important for our young people about mindfulness or anybody? It's the power to choose. Choice is liberation, right? We know that our survival mechanisms usually will make us react. We don't have choice there. So I use this as an example. There was a 5th grader. He's now 19 years old. Lives in Indiana actually now. But he was getting into fights a lot on the playground. About 6 suspensions in about 6 weeks. Every time they let him on the playground, he was getting kicked out of school. We started working with him about a month earlier than that. And this is the beginning of our organization. And we're teaching him mindfulness, we're teaching him the 7 skills, we're doing yoga, we're doing expressive arts. He's starting to build up practice, but he's still, when he's on the playground, he can't regulate. He's playing basketball. The principal says, hey, he's about to fight again, come out, check it out. So I come out, I'm watching. And all of a sudden a kid comes and he's about to shoot. The kid comes and strips the ball from him from behind and he goes right away. And I say, hey, come over here. I'm not gonna say his name for privacy reasons. Hey, come over here. he stops for a second. He doesn't hit the kid. He's like, what, man? I'm gonna beat this dude up. I'm gonna beat him up. I'm like, I get it. Like, come here. I just want to check in with you real quick. What does mindfulness mean? Paying attention to present moment without judgment. I'm like, all right, cool. Good definition. Which mindful skills do you use? He's like, man, I ain't using no mindful skills when someone takes the ball from me. I was like, you're playing basketball, bro. Like, really, he didn't even foul you. Like, what are you talking about right now? And he's like, no, for real though. He's always messing with me. I'm like, I get it. Do you like to fight? At first, he's like, yeah, because I got to protect. I'm like, protect? Okay, you didn't have to protect yourself right there, but do you like to fight? He's like, nah, man, I don't like going home. It's boring. I'm like, cool. I don't want to tell you what to do in life because that's not my role, but I want to tell you you can have the power to choose what you do. So here's the thing. Where do you feel anger? And he's like, right here. He showed me right away. I was like, yes, your fists are right away. Cool. So guess what? If you do a body scan just real quick to your fists, you can then choose to either hit or not hit. Then it's your choice. Then he doesn't control you, and your fight, flight, freeze, your survival mechanism doesn't control you. So where I work with a teacher, I work with a counselor, we do a secret little code when he's feeling amped up. We say, hey, pay attention to our code, watch our signals. It'll be rub of the ear, and then you check your fists. Take a deep breath in, notice your emotions, name the emotion, tame the emotion, and then check in what you want to do. So check it out. 6 weeks later, 6 weeks go by, no more suspensions, no more fights. His mom knows the secret technique. We're doing it together. But guess what? After the 6th week, I get a call. And he got into a fight. So I drive on campus. I go over there. I'm like, principal, don't suspend. Please don't suspend. Let me talk to him, see what happened. So he looks at me. And this is the best moment probably of all my education career. He looks at me with a huge smile. He's like, hey, I'm like, what's up? He's like, I chose. And I'm like, you chose? What do you mean you chose? Yeah, I chose to hit. And I started laughing hysterically. I'm like, oh my God, that's the lesson. Tell me more because I hope you chose for the right reason. He's like, I did the right thing. I was in the corner near the portables. 3 6th graders come on me, start hitting on me, get on top of me. I yell for help. No one comes. When no one comes, I then realize I look around, no one's around. So I start swinging my arms to get them away from me. At that point, they run away and they go to the office and tell the principal I hit them. I was like, bro, I'm so proud of you. This is incredible. What a moment, right? He's 19 years old now, and he's actually a new father, but he calls me. He's like, hey, this mindfulness thing changed my life, right? I went from having this reactionary thing that I didn't want to do to be able to change that pattern. So I think that's really the key for us in mindfulness education is the power to choose, especially as a white male. I can't even think. I do all day think about being an African-American experience in this country or Latino experience in this country and how just overwhelmingly challenging this system is and how horrible our kids feel in the system. So I think that's the key for us is really making sure that mindfulness is not something to pacify and calm people down. It's about being fully present with it all, with compassion and care, but also in responding in ways that really change our society, be the society we really believe it can be. So I see 2 minutes left from the COSM team. Any last questions? So reach out to me if you need any support. We love supporting our schools all over the place. So I'm just gonna end with this. If you wanna take a screenshot, if you write down the information, on our YouTube channel, we have all the mindful hip hop. So I'm gonna try to actually show you that real quick as we have 2 minutes left. So I'm gonna try to come over to 1 second. So just go on our Mindful Life Project YouTube channel. And on the YouTube channel, you're gonna see a bunch of different practices. Oh, let me see real quick. You're gonna see a lot of practices in our mindful hip hop. So I'm gonna end with one of our songs. If I can get over there, I thought I had YouTube up. Look at technology. Excuse me. Go on Mindful Life Project TV, and on Mindful Life Project TV, you will see all our different adult practices, student practices, and our mindful hip hop. And for some reason, technology is not wanting to work with me right now. Mindful breath. Looks like my Wi-Fi might be a little bit shoddy right now. So let's see if I can get it up. Name it to tame it. Frustration, frustration, frustration. You got the computer in front of you. Go on to the page real quick before you end this. Go Mindful Life Project TV. It looks like my internet is starting to slow it down. Hopefully you can still see me. You'll see a bunch of our songs. Our kids create lyrics with our team, And then our team always has about 5 to 7 professional artists on the team, from hip hop to spoken word. And so we create these songs for young people, and the YouTube channel is starting to pop up, but my goodness, my internet is slow. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the conference. Thank you for being a part of this movement. I believe that mindfulness education can truly transform our society. I know that we start with you as educators. I want to share again the deep gratitude for all that you do, both seen and unseen, specifically this year. This has been a year in education like no other. So I wish you all well. Have a wonderful rest of your conference. And thanks again. And I'll try to end with one of our songs.
Too many things on my mind, I'm like, don't flip your lid. I pause and assess the situation. Feel the stress coming on, why am I feeling so big? I stop and I notice my frustration. Don't flip your lid. 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 Stop and notice how you're feeling.
Only thing that I hit is the vibraton, just so that I can get into my mindful zone. When others get to tripping, I make sure I don't give in. No, I ain't gon' flip my lid, I'm accountable. Miss Maya in a mindful sit, checking on my breath, with my hand on my tummy. No matter what, others can try to bug if they want. Now no one can disrupt me. Don't flip your lid, got to stop and listen to all your emotions. Got to calm the ocean. Make sure your amygdala don't open, and let them learn from that mindfulness that you showin'.
Too many things on my mind, I'm like, don't flip your lid. I pause and assess the situation.
So that's one of about maybe 60 songs we have. So go ahead, use the songs with the kids. There's so many more. So again, everyone, thanks for joining today. Have a wonderful rest of your week and everything between. I hope to hear from you all. Take good care. Bye, everyone.